Hello and welcome into another video. We are Ryan and Megan. We are two traveling physical therapists. We love this lifestyle. We want to share it with you. And so today we are talking about the top 7 mistakes to avoid as a new traveler.
Okay, so our first mistake to avoid as a new traveler is just going with the first travel recruiter that contacts you. We've all been there. We've had travel recruiters email us, send us direct messages on Facebook and Instagram. And a mistake could be just going with that first travel recruiter that contacts you because you're excited about the travel therapy lifestyle. We always recommend try to get recruiter recommendations from people who have been traveling. This really helps because they've already worked with that recruiter, they've taken contracts with that recruiter, so they feel confident with the communication standard there with that recruiter, and then they can kind of recommend them to you, and you can feel a little more confident that they've taken care of your friend for the past couple contracts or years. Mm-hmm. We also recommend trying to find a recruiter that's been a travel recruiter for 3 to 5 years or more, because there's a lot of turnover in the industry, and a lot of the travel recruiters that are reaching out to you are probably new ones trying to get their traveler caseload up a little bit.
And there's nothing saying that they can't be great recruiters, but we do generally recommend finding a friend or finding a solid source and getting their recommended recruiters. If you want to learn a little bit more about finding good recruiters, we have a video on that. We'll link it around here somewhere, and you can look at that to find out a little bit more.
And we're always open to sharing the recruiters that we personally use and trust with you. We usually have a link down in the description that you can click, or you can simply email us at ryanandmeganorear@gmail.com, which I'll have down here.
So for mistake number 2 to avoid, we have kind of coined this term, know your worth, but also know your recruiter. And that's why mistake number 1 is very important to avoid. A lot of times we come out of school, if you're a new grad, really being excited to get into the field and to know how much work you've put into your schooling. So you know that you want to get paid a fair rate, you know that you want to have a good work environment, and sometimes it can be nerve-wracking thinking that this recruiter might be taking advantage of you, or maybe it's just a new industry, so you don't know what to expect. It's a fine line to walk. You want to know your worth, but you want to be respectful to the recruiter. If you find a good recruiter, then you can trust that they're going to be there to have your back, to represent you well. So that's why step number 1 and step number 2 are very important.
Yeah, they kind of go hand in hand because, of course, there's always that fear as a new traveler that you're going to be taken advantage of by recruiters. But sometimes I think our industry does a poor job of representing the recruiter and letting new travelers know that when you have good recruiters, they are for you. And they want to be for you. They want you to have a good experience at each contract, because then you'll keep coming back to them and working with them. And so you get a good recruiter through recommendations, you feel like you gel with them, you have a good line of communication, and then you can ask them on certain jobs that you see, like, hey, this seems kind of low for that area, or I'm seeing other jobs that are worth a little bit more from my other recruiters. That's why we also recommend working with 2 or 3 recruiters. But you have an open line of communication that you can just ask them, like, hey, this seems low, what's going on? And they can be honest with you and be like, well, the hospital just isn't paying the travel company enough, and this is all we can really offer you. And you can feel confident that they are giving you that direct number. A red flag, and we won't go into all recruiter red flags, but one that we see is if your recruiter's like all of a sudden finds you money and says, oh, well, we can bring it up to this much, and they add like $200 a week, that can be a red flag of like, okay, well, why didn't you give me that from the beginning? Like you said, it's that fine line. Feel confident, know your worth, but also know your recruiter.
Yeah, and it really just comes down to having a good line of communication open and both of you being respectful to each other.
The number 3 mistake to avoid as a new traveler is just not being very flexible. And when we say that, we mean there's three categories you want to kind of prioritize, and that is pay, location, and setting. And we always tell people, you know, prioritize those, and whichever is your number one, like say it for us, it's usually location. We want to go somewhere cool. We want to see the things around it, whether it be national parks or cities. And then we're willing to be a little bit more flexible on like pay or what setting that we're working in. And I think that's an important relationship of those three things to understand as a new traveler, because it's hard to get all three. And sometimes you end up waiting a long time. Not impossible, but sometimes you wait a long time to try to get all three.
Yes, so just keeping at least one as your top priority, communicating that to your recruiters so that they know what to prioritize when they're looking for jobs for you is important. If you kind of come into the situation thinking, I have to get paid this much, it has to be in this certain city or this certain state, and I will only work in one setting, it may be really challenging to land your first contract or to land subsequent contracts. There's just priorities you have to have, and then some things that you're willing to be a little flexible on. The fourth mistake that we say to avoid is not knowing what to ask during your interview with the contract. So you're interviewing for your first contract. This is really your opportunity to find out as much information about it as you can. And it's really a great time to feel out if this is going to be a good spot for you to go to as your first travel contract. It can kind of make or break the experience. So you want to know what questions to ask to give you that insight. And we have a video on this as well. It's really helpful if you're a new grad to know what to ask for, or just if you're nervous about jumping into travel, you want to know what to expect. And this is your time to ask those questions.
Yeah, I think what people don't understand who are new to travel therapy is that this interview with the facility is a lot different than your permanent interview looking for a permanent job. And so really this is your opportunity as the traveler to find out as much as you can about that facility that you're considering going to work at. And so sometimes I think new travelers come into it like, well, I just need to really impress because I really want this job. Most of the time that facility is just needing someone. And so you don't necessarily have to impress so much. You're really wanting to get information out of them of you know, a lot of different questions to find out what is the work environment I'm about to go into. And like Megan said, we have a video on that, kind of the top 10 interview questions to ask. And we also have a PDF, which we'll link to down in the description also, that lists those kind of our top 10 questions that we ask for each travel assignment.
Yes. So don't miss that opportunity to ask those questions. That will play a huge part in whether you're able to confidently say yes or no to taking that contract. Mistake number 5 to avoid is not knowing how to find your own affordable housing. A lot of times travel companies will offer to put you up in a house or a place while you are on your contract. Usually that's a more expensive route to go, and there are a lot of alternatives to housing in the travel world. There is Airbnbs, there's Furnished Finder, short-term rentals, hotels, and then there's even like the RV lifestyle. So we have a video on this, what to look for in housing. We'll link that here, but you definitely want to look into finding your own housing. You probably want to look into that before you take the contract, because it might affect how you negotiate your pay, or it might affect whether you take the contract at all.
Yeah, learn from our mistakes on this one. So a lot of times when we make videos for you guys, it's stuff we would want to know as we were new travelers. And this is definitely one of them. And so before you sign on that contract line, make sure you have an idea of what your housing is, or if it's already set up. Because we, as most of you guys know, we travel in our RV, and like one of our contracts up in Wisconsin, it was just the wrong time of the year, and we did not consider that. We saw all these RV parks near the location, so we were like, no problem. So we signed on the dotted line, and then as we started calling RV parks, we quickly found out that they were not going to be open during the duration of our contract. So we didn't have any housing, so we had to kind of shift gears and go to an Airbnb. And so just be flexible on that, know where you need to go, and consider kind of buttoning down some housing before you sign on that dotted line, or at least have a good idea of it.
Yeah, at least getting leads on housing and knowing what to expect.
Yeah, because it can affect your decision too. So like our contract in Seattle, when we went there, we knew, okay, the cost of living is going to be a whole lot more. And as we started looking into housing, it was a whole lot more. And so that might deter you. It didn't deter us because we wanted to go there for that location. But as a traveler, you might think, oh no, that's too much. That's going to take too much out of my pay. And so I rather just go to somewhere that's a little more rural and cost of living is a little lower so I can make the most money. So again, kind of going back to those priorities.
The sixth mistake to avoid is working off of the clock. Now there is a fine balance between being as efficient as possible because you are a traveler and you're there to fill a need. But sometimes there are just extra or unrealistic expectations, and the facility's expecting you to do your documentation off the clock in order to be as efficient as they need you to be. And at that point, it's not okay. So we would say at that point, go to your recruiter, let them know what's happening, make as many adjustments as you can to be as efficient as possible, but draw the line at having to work off the clock.
Yeah, if they're asking you to, the big one is do documentation off the clock and unpaid, really. They're asking you to do work unpaid, then that's when you need to really say no. And you can say no through your travel recruiter who should represent you, because it's a big liability on the travel company for you to work off the clock. And you should be paid for that time. And so if the facility is not willing to pay you the overtime maybe needed to do your documentation, then that's when your recruiter company steps in and starts negotiating, like, okay, well then we need to build in some documentation time so you get the amount of work that they're expecting done in that 40-hour work week. It's always an awkward subject to kind of talk about, because a lot of times you'll have permanent therapists and other therapists around you, maybe even travelers, who have just kind of given in. They're just kind of like, okay, well, I clock out and I go do an hour of documentation each night. And as an industry, that just is not good for us, because we should be paid for that time.
And it's also against the law to be doing work off of the clock. And like Ryan said, it's a liability for your travel company, so your recruiter doesn't want you doing it either. So just communicate it with the recruiter and find something that will solve the problem and be good for both you and the facility. Just know that it shouldn't be expected of you to work off the clock, and that your recruiter will be there to help you get the situation figured out.
Now, if you're a new grad and you hop straight into travel and you're kind of getting used to the workflow, be sure that you communicate to your facility or maybe your therapy manager and really ask them, like, how can I be more efficient in my documentation? What are some different ways that you do it so you can get all your work done? Be sure to ask those questions, especially as a new grad, so you're doing as much as you can for that facility to be as productive as you can, but draw a line at them wanting you to just do your documentation off the clock.
The last mistake to avoid, number 7, is not understanding tax homes as a traveler. This is how you get a huge benefit of some extra tax-free income, and you want to be making sure that you're following the law when it comes to receiving this tax-free income.
Yeah, I don't know how many times we've talked to different travelers and they talk about how they've been traveling for a long time, but those first few years, they had no idea what a tax home was, and really they were accepting those housing and food stipends tax-free illegally. And so that's why you really want to understand the tax home law. We do have another video that we'll link to where we kind of go in depth about what a tax home is and how you can maintain it. And so that's an important video to watch, or just research to do before you travel, so you make sure that you are accepting that tax-free money legally, because the IRS does audit people every so often, and if you ever got audited and you were accepting tax-free money, then you would have to pay a bunch of back taxes, and that's never something people want.
Yes, so we often say it sounds really big and scary, but once you take a look into it and get it figured out, it is very simple to maintain. You just want to make sure that you have a plan for it before you start accepting your whole tax-free pay stub as a traveler. So look into that video. It'll be linked right here. And I think that wraps up our 7 mistakes to avoid.
Yep, 7 mistakes to avoid as a new traveler. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button. Consider subscribing to our channel for more travel therapy content. And until next time, see ya.